You guys way in the back. How are you going to participate in the discussion way back there? Come, join the crowd. Join the happy throng. Join our happy throng. It's a new format. This is the first time I can remember that we've had something that you read before you came. And so if you haven't read it, this will be Greek to you. It won't be very satisfying for you. There are a couple of reasons why I'm the presenter this week. One is that our other presenter canceled. And the other is that over the Christmas holidays, I had this idea, and I'm interested in discussing it with someone. And you guys are the lucky recipients of my benefice. I'm going to assume that you read it. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. But what I'm going to ask for is your response. Your response. I brought some questions if I have to ask questions. But I'd rather hear, first of all, what kinds of, what impression did this leave with you?
I thought it was kind of a, I was trying to view it kind of as a collection of little, not little maxims, but just kind of little ways. I know in our field so many times it's hard to explain what we do and the little aspects of it. And this is one kind of thing that is kind of difficult to explain. What does it mean? Skill. What is skill? And the one thing that kind of jumped out to me is you mentioned that it can be improved. I don't remember where it is, but something about in moments, through spirituality and through kind of, sort of there's this unexplainable moments when performance and skill can kind of be better. I thought that was an interesting idea to think about. That we've all seen that. We've probably all experienced it. These moments of brilliance when it all comes together. And what's the source of that? How does that happen? And I thought that was an interesting thing to think about.
Can you remember a time, or can any of you remember a time?
I like how you said, to me, what stood out was those were moments of evaluation when they started coming together. And I think we did pondering, prayer, or evaluating.
How do you learn as you're performing a skill? First of all, do you learn as you perform a skill? Do you learn as you're performing a skill?
I think you can learn as you perform a skill, but I think there's a certain level where you get proficiency enough that you can almost run on autopilot. And if you just continue at that level and just perform at that level, you're not going to learn and gain from it. And the case in point I refer to is my violin playing, which I played violin for high school, all of high school, and then a little bit in college, and I stopped really practicing. I can still play at a level that would impress people who've never played before, but it doesn't impress me, and I feel like I haven't made any progress. Even if I get out and play those same songs, I can express that skill, but it's not getting any better.
When you play the songs now, do you play as well as you played?
I think I play as well as I played in high school.
So you've maintained your level, you believe?
Watching the Olympic, watched the figure skating yesterday, the men's, I think skill can be learned. Those people learn how to do triple axels and all that, but so many guys practice so long for Olympic just fail. And I feel baffled then, but here you said skills are dynamic action potential, its quality on a given occasion can be highly variable depending on emotional factors, shifting confidence, expectations, state of mind, incentive, and the momentary goals, and blah, blah, blah. So you could learn, but there's always dynamic factors that kicks in. You know it, you could do it. The triple axel doesn't mean that you would do it in the competition in that given moment because of dynamics in performing.
So it's not like an absolute behavior. Its quality varies, it seems. Okay?
Along those lines, it's been interesting to listen to kind of sports radio as they've kind of talked about these kinds of things. And somebody yesterday was complaining about how too many of the contestants are happy with the silver medal. But I think that's kind of a reflection of different ways that I think in the world we've changed our idea of what it means to be skillful. That maybe it doesn't mean, you were the best in that moment, but people are more recognizing this is a lifetime of making decisions and choosing to perfect a craft and getting to this point where you're the second best person in the world, rather than you're a failure. You're the first place loser. Or things like that. I think that people are starting to shift what it means to be skillful and what it means to be.
Interesting. Keith?
Case in point, going off of what Spencer was saying, as you go from Olympic to Olympic, the standard changes. The gold medalist one year may not necessarily be the gold medalist next year. The definition of what constitutes expert skill is dynamic, and that's just the nature of
The level of skill expected of performers changes, doesn't it?
And the definition of what's expected itself is fluid. I mean, every year the judges don't come in with the same paradigm for judging the skill expertise.
Yeah. And as a matter of fact, if pressed, they have a hard time sometimes explaining the scores that they award, like in the figure skating. John?
I like the idea here of second last paragraph talking about bringing something from the explicit level into the implicit. So bringing something to the attention and repeating that exercise until it becomes something that's not explicit, something implicit. I had a question about do relationships have skill? I wonder if in mentor arrangements or student-to-teacher relationships, are there relationships that seem successful but become very complacent? And is there skill involved in not just dealing with generic teacher relationships, but within a specific relationship? And my concern is that you mentioned that success in experiments leads to an increased willingness to experiment and innovate. And I thought, well, sometimes it seems like some relationships become stagnant, some organizations become stagnant, some teams become stagnant. There's not this compelling force to innovate and experiment, but to rather kind of die away.
As a matter of fact, that's relative to what Christian was saying. That how many of you have run into the work of Anders Ericsson? Anders Ericsson, he writes about skill and skill learning, expertise. One of the things that he has noticed is that skill through practice can increase, but then the increase in ability seems to level off, just like you're talking about, John. This is kind of an interesting point here. What happens at that point? Why does the ability level off?
Maybe they just don't have the more microscopic view of what needs to be improved. They don't have the ability to identify how to step it up.
For me, when I was reading this, I thought it needs an outside impetus, some sort of other energy to push it along. That's why I kind of disagree with the idea of it being a breeder-reactor, where it's developing a skill within itself. I feel like there's some other energy that has to come and disrupt things and push things to another level, where coaching comes in, or mentoring, or even somebody's internal motivation to be the best or be better. That outside energy has to come in.
Okay. Now you're saying that your violin playing leveled off, your violin playing skill leveled off. Have any of you experienced where your violin or guitar playing actually diminished and you lost it? And then what's the standard phrase that we use? Oh, I've forgotten how to play tennis, and then somebody says, back to you. It's just like riding a bike. And so it's possible to restore a skill through practice. One of the things that Anders Ericsson talks about is people who don't sit still on a skill. Can you name some examples of people who just seem to be getting better and better all the time? Even Lance Armstrong, yes?
Michael Jordan, I guess one of the stories about him is that he always had like a shooting coach. He was always practicing the shot.
Now that's interesting. He had a shooting coach. Golfers, do they have putting coaches and drive coaches? So they get specialist coaches. Why do they do that? Why is that necessary?
A lot of times the coach can see things that they themselves don't see. I don't know, I'm just gonna say that.
That's right. They have an outside perspective looking in. So one of the things that hampers moving forward with a skill is that you lose the ability to see yourself performing the skill.
Why did you use the past tense
In
in Michael Jordan?
oh,
He's still alive and he's still possibly, or even if he retired, does he still have the...
I think he's a coach now, isn't he?
He owns the Charlotte Bob.
Yeah, he's not. He's not.
Practicing, I hope.
Probably, we hope so.
Well, so what's the difference in a skill like sport that depends also on your age and your physical vitality compared to something like someone who's a wonderful author whose work gets better and better throughout their life and they write their masterpiece when they're 85?
That is an excellent question.
I watched the Michael Jordan's interview when he was Hall of Fame or something last year, or something like that. He said his physical ability diminished. Like he could tell that when he was 30, he could not like score like when he was 23.
Mhm.
So he said, my physical ability diminished, so I could not keep up with those young guys if I played like when I was 23. But he said, but mentally, I started to become better player because cognitively he learned how to play better. So that his cognitive skill, how to play basketball, kept increasing. And he even said, I'm 45 right now, but if my body can keep up with what I know right now, then I'll be the best player in NBA. But he mentioned the physical capability just goes there.
Okay, so some of the key factors in continuing the creation of expertise are being able to pay attention to the things that you can't see in your own performance, setting goals for yourself, even if your energy is diminishing. There's a phrase, and I'm not going to be able to remember what it says. It says, basically it says that as you get older, you have to depend more on cunning and stealth and less on energy and vigor of performance, but older people can perform better because they're more cunning, I guess. That was really not a very good paraphrase. But having an external coach of some kind, and sometimes specialized coaches, becomes an important part of continuing the development of expertise. Keith?
I like what John was saying about mentoring because I think that the coach may not need to be somebody that's advanced in years or way more knowledgeable in several areas, but maybe just knows different things. A more knowledgeable other that can bring additional insight to you that maybe is a peer or maybe even subordinate.
The coach seems to have noticed something about performance that neither the expert nor other coaches have noticed. Do you notice that? All coaches are not created equal. They're not created equal in technique, and they're not created equal in insight into what it is that's hampering the progress of performance improvement. Let's come back to Anniki's question, though. What was your question?
The difference between skills that in which
Physical skills and...
and then skills that age and infirmity don't really touch.
Okay. Skills, for instance, is typing a skill? Is writing a book a skill? Dynamic, adaptive performance, yeah. Okay. Are there mental skills? Is there such a thing as problem-solving ability? Skill? Okay. Does that improve over time? Can that improve over time? It's dynamic. Is it adaptive? It's unpredictable. It's all those things. Spencer?
Another thing I thought about while I was reading is the block that happens sometimes, writer's block, or things where someone has a skill and then they get paralyzed, and you see it in the Olympics, and you see, in some of my own work, it's hard for me sometimes to get something done because I just get this moment of paralysis, like I don't know quite what to do on the next one. And I thought about, writers like Hemingway and Mark Twain, and some of the best writers got their starts as journalists, and on a deadline they had to get things done, and you go out and you find out what other writers have done, and they decide, I'm going to write 10 pages every day, it doesn't matter, every day I'm doing this.
Yeah.
So the people who are the best at their craft and the most skillful are usually ones who have set these kinds of goals and have decided, like, I'm going to push through it no matter what. So it's no accident when they are able to perform.
And they are regular in their practice. As a matter of fact, there's a book that I'd recommend for those who haven't seen it. The title of the book is Talent is Overrated. It's by a guy named Colvin, C-O-L-V-I-N. Talent is Overrated. It's an excellent book on skills. It's an excellent book, and it talks about the very thing that you're talking about. You had a comment over here. You had something you were going to say.
I love.
We still haven't answered Aniki's question, by the way.
Was that a question?
Okay. How pervasive is skill in what we normally call knowledge or a person's performance abilities? You notice I'm not talking about a thing called a skill, and I avoided it in the writing. Why would I do that? Why would I avoid this idea that there is such a thing as a skill?
The very last paragraph on the note said a skilled ability is not a thing. I think that's the critical idea, is that it's more of an abstract concept, it's more of a verb than a noun. It's something that
How does that paragraph end?
it says, foundations of the ability change over time and combine and recombine with each other as the performer gains insights, losing the identity of the original ability through blending. So it's constantly changing. There's no way to statically define skill. It redefines itself through experience.
In the early days of instructional design, there was this concept of categories of behavior or performance or learning. You're all familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, with Gagne's taxonomy, perhaps with Merrill's taxonomy, and there were many others. Melton had one. I'm trying to remember. There must have been 10 or 15 different taxonomies of instructional objectives. That's what they were usually. And they would think of them as static classes. And once you had identified a concept, that concept was there. Actually, Gagne talked about two kinds of concept, a defined concept, and then I can't remember what the second concept class was. But he thought there were two different kinds of concepts that we learned. But in the idea of skill is implicit the idea that the skill is constantly morphing, that the performer is constantly morphing, that skill is actually an adaptive behavior. What does it mean by adaptive behavior?
I was just going to say, it's something that changes in relation to experience and learning. As you continue to grow in knowledge and experience, then that skill associated with those things will continue to adapt along with you.
Yeah, and the idea is that, at least the idea that I wrote, is that every time you perform a skill, you're changed somehow. And I don't know if that's a supportable idea or not. None of this is like scientific stuff. This is all.
Well, and now I'm wondering about the relationship between skill and intelligence, because we have all these theories on intelligence, on whether it's just a thing you can have, whether this is G, or maybe there's second intelligences, or maybe, what that means. And I think skill is really analogous to that. I don't know if they're separate things, or I don't know if skill is an intelligence.
That's a good question. Christian?
My thought was that saying that a skill changes, it's just like saying that time changes people. I don't know if you're just acting, being, you're going to change no matter what. And so for skill, I don't see skill as always improving or changing that much unless you have some desire to push beyond that. So people sit and watch TV, they may know a little bit more, but are they...
Is it a conscious desire? For instance, when you were young, you took your first halting steps with your parents' help. So the skill was scaffolded in that case. And then you let go of their hands. And do you walk better today than you did the first time you let go of their hands?
But it's because you wanted to walk, you wanted to get to things. If I watch my kids learning to walk, it's because they want to get to things, they want to climb up on things.
So you'd say it's a deliberate choice
Yeah,
to
they're-
keep improving your skill.
Well, I think that's one interesting thing. So just along what Christian's saying, like brushing your teeth every day, we think, well, we hit this level of automaticity, and there's not an improvement in learning emotions have changed. We're in a completely whole new situation. Yeah, we are learning. I think I agree with that one.
Isaku?
The Ichiro, the baseball player, do you guys know him? He's pretty famous. He said one time he was in an interview and he was talking with O, which is the most celebrated baseball hitter in Japan. He hit like 865 home runs or something like that. It's like a world record, you know. And then he was talking to him, Ichiro was, and then he asked him, you know, I'm practicing baseball for 15 years. And after 15 years, I think that hitting the ball should be easier. I should know by now how to hit the ball. But he says, but each year I find myself, it's difficult to hit the ball. And he asking O, which had the tremendous career, to say, do you feel the same way or you felt different? For you, hitting that home run became easier after a year. And he said the same thing. He said, no, I find myself every single year hitting the home run become difficult and difficult, so I have to keep learning, keep changing. So I think, for the people who practice that level, still find that their skill has to change every year. Every season has to change in order to keep
Okay.
it.
Steve, there was somebody back here. Was it Keith and then Steve?
I was just going to comment that we shouldn't be making the assumption that every time we have an experience or every time we grow in our intelligence that somehow has to transform us. There is a time lapse, a time frame for this transformation, this progress and skill to take place. Not everything changes us all the time, right now, but it may later on down the line.
So there's some residue that can be active later, that can be
Absolutely.
activated. Steve?
I thought Saku's example was interesting. If you think about baseball hitters, talk about skill, how fast your baseball is coming. In Major League Baseball,
95 miles an hour.
About 95 miles an hour. You can't even see it hardly. You know, and how are they supposed to hit that thing? And then not only how are they supposed to hit it, but they hit it in very strategic places, right? Like if you're batting for average, you know, you got to just think about the amazing ability to do that. You know, I mean, there's got to be something beyond adaptive behavior going on here. You know, and then think about concert pianists, how fast how much they can move, how fast they can go, and so on. Remember Carl Lashley, the famous behavioral psychologist, was studying this and trying to figure out tracking neural activity with the finger movements, and the brain couldn't fire fast enough to match what the fingers were doing as they were moving across the keyboard. So it's like, this is now like a physical, you can't get at this from behaviors and neurological standpoint. It's like something.
As a matter of fact, the baseball hitter has to start the swing at the point where the ball is leaving the pitcher's
Yeah, it's like
hands.
it's fully embodied activity. You know, it's not like a cerebral thing or something like that. And well, at APA once, guy was on a symposium was talking about Michael Jordan. And Dana Robinson, who's this guy from Georgetown who comes in and just talks to Wheatley all the time and so on, said, you know, you're trying to make sense of you're trying to make sense of Michael Jordan from one or another psychological theory, but I'm going to tell you one thing right now. Michael Jordan's ability to play basketball is a gift from God. The ABA. I'm wondering if you're going to get into that. I mean, in the flyer, you said something about LDS perspective, you know, on this. I was wondering if you're going to move into that a little bit, because there's got to be something about our embodied spiritual children of God type aspect here that's crucial to all of us.
In pursuit of Aniki's question, which is probably a really good question. Do you remember Elder Scott's conference talk from last conference? Title of it is To Acquire Spiritual Guidance, and he's talking about how he has experienced revelation, inspiration, how it came to him. He's talking about learning from the Spirit. He says, now I share an experience that taught me a way to gain spiritual guidance. I was going to make copies of this, but I didn't get disengaged long enough. One Sunday, I attended a priesthood meeting of a Spanish branch in Mexico City. I vividly recall how a humble Mexican priesthood leader struggled to communicate the truths of the gospel in his lesson material. I noted the intense desire he had to share those principles. he strongly valued with his quorum members. He recognized that they were of great worth to the brethren present. In his manner, there was an evidence of the pure love of the Savior, the love of those he taught. His sincerity, purity of intent, and love permitted a spiritual strength to envelop the room. I was deeply touched. Then I began to receive personal impressions as an extension of the principles taught by that humble instructor. They were personal and related to my assignments in the area. I think he probably means geographic area. They came in answer to my prolonged prayerful efforts to learn. As each impression came, I carefully wrote it down. In the process, I was given precious truths that I greatly needed in order to be a more effective servant of the Lord. The details of the communication are sacred, and like a patriarchal blessing, were for my individual benefit. I was given specific directions, instructions, and conditioned promises that have beneficially altered the course of my life. Subsequently, I visited the Sunday school class in our ward, where a very well-educated teacher presented his lesson. That experience was in striking contrast to the one enjoyed in the priesthood meeting. It seemed to me that the instructor had purposely chosen obscure references and unusual examples to illustrate the principles of the lesson. I'd hate to be that teacher.
Unusual examples.
Yeah. I had the distinct impression that this instructor was using the teaching opportunity to impress the class with his vast store of knowledge. At any rate, he certainly did not seem as intent on communicating principles as had the humble priesthood leader. In that environment, strong impressions began to flow to me again. I wrote them down. The message included specific counsel on how to become more effective as an instrument in the hands of the Lord. I received such an outpouring of impressions that were so personal that I felt it was not appropriate to record them in the midst of a Sunday school class. I sought a more private location where I continued to write the feelings that flooded into my mind and heart as faithfully as possible. After each powerful impression was recorded, I pondered the feelings I had received to determine if I had accurately expressed them in writing. As a result, I made a few minor changes to what had been written. Then I studied their meaning and application in my own life. Subsequently, I prayed, reviewing with the Lord what I thought I had been taught by the Spirit. When a feeling of peace came, I thanked him for the guidance given. I was then impressed to ask, was there yet more to be given? I received further impressions, and the process of writing down the impressions, pondering and praying for confirmation was repeated. Again, I was prompted to ask, is there more I should know? And there was. When the last most sacred experience was concluded, I had received some of the most precious, specific, personal direction one could hope to obtain in this life. Had I not responded to this first impressions and recorded them, I would not have received the last most precious guidance. What I have described is not an isolated experience. He goes on, it embodies several true principles regarding communication from the Lord to his children here on earth. I believe that you can leave the most precious personal direction of the Spirit unheard because you do not respond to record and apply the first promptings that come to you. Now, in the light of Aniki's question, describe what this story tells you. How does it relate to the idea of skill? Or does it?
I think there's a lot to be said about attention and that self-awareness that he had to recognize what was going on in the process. And with everything like this, someone that wants to be good at mowing the lawn, they pay attention to how the lines are being. Someone who wants to be good at the way that they interact with others pays attention to how the things they say affect others. And so there's something about that attention, I think, that really changes the skillful act of the individual. And I think he really showed that right there, the ability to he's had a lifetime of experience of this communication and being able to ask that question, is there more? How many people would just take the first offering and then run out, you know?
Was there a skill involved here? Was there a skilled performance involved here?
At least one of the skills I noticed was that skill to receive revelation. And being that he's an apostle, I don't know when this experience took place, but my thought was, wow, if he can learn about share some of those principles with us. He didn't share the revelations, but his focus was on, these are things you need to do if you want to improve the revelation you receive from the Lord.
Normally in a talk like this, they would tell you what they had received.
That wasn't the point.
Why didn't he? What is his message? What is he trying to say?
You've got to go through the same process to get the same skill.
And is it a mechanical process? Is it just a procedure? Okay, let's see. Step 5, ask, is there any more? And wait. Aniki?
Title of that talk again?
It's called To Acquire Spiritual Guidance. It's in the last conference. It's about the second or third talk in.
I
Carol?
heard of an experience that President Monson had. It actually happened to my husband's family in Highland. And basically, President Monson woke up one day and just felt like he needed to drive to Highland, the Alpine area. And he drove there and he went to this funeral that, like, he didn't even know a funeral was going on, but he went to this funeral. And at it, it was the funeral of a little boy, and his dad had run him over. And President Monson was able to talk to the parents and tell them that this was not their fault and stuff. And I was thinking when I heard that story, like, wow, that is incredible. Like, that's what the prophet should do. Like, he should be able to get those promptings of driving all the way from Salt Lake to Highland, knowing exactly where to go. But really, like Elder Scott is saying, like, this is a process that is developed when we intricately, like, when we allow ourselves to take these steps to learn how to pay attention and learn how to follow the simple promptings of being still and in turn being able to be directed.
There's a nice discrimination there. Most of us hear a story like that and we say, oh, that's so great, you know, he was just going through his morning routine and wham, there was this idea in his mind. We say, that never happens to me. Or does it?
And I got so many ideas coming at the same time. I'm having some fun here. But it reminds me of like research on motivation and how we're finding out that it's not actually this inherent talent that does anything. It's practice. Pretty much the answer for everything. Practice. And there's virtuosos, but that only gets them so far. You know, it's great to be virtuoso when you're 12, but when you're 24 and you're not doing anything with it, it's not so great anymore. Same thing spiritually, and I think spiritually is kind of the best example because we're all on such equal footing to start out with, even apostles and lay members, and we have to go through the same amount of practice. We have to spend the time and do the required number of things to gain that. And our culture likes the prodigy view. We like the idea that maybe I'm just talented in something and I'm not in another, but that's not helpful for us as learners, and it's not helpful for us in the gospel. And I'm wondering if this is all the same thing as the skills that your body is good at, but then you get old and lose them. Maybe there's really no such thing as that because it's the underlying spiritual skill that you're developing the whole time. And because we know, so this is where I'm getting from the ideas, because we know that we're immortal, there's no such thing as mortal skills to us because we know there's a resurrection. Somebody who's worked really hard in a physical skill may lose that capacity for a while, but hasn't lost what they worked in.
I was just going to say off of that, I've been studying some neuroscience over the weekend. I got a great book called On Intelligence by Jeff Hawkins. Highly recommend it. But this principle is so important. The development of the skill that takes place within the brain and the neocortex sheet and whatnot stays there. Even if you lose the physical ability, your body maintains the imprint or the pattern or the design to know how to do it. And so even if physically you become incapable, mentally you are completely capable. If we develop bionic body parts, you know, that could restore our functionality, we would have the capacity, the skill to be able to perform these things. And
They're exploring that right up the road here at Utah University.
And also, I think spirit could do the skill, know the skill, whatever. Like a Mozart or something like that, 3 years old, started to play piano.
Did he just start to play the piano?
His father.
See-
That is the question.
He was trained.
He was immersed from his birth in music, heard music, was taught music by his father. As a matter of fact, Anarchy, your point about prodigy and these prodigies burn brightly for a while, but then they level off because they don't know where their prodigy came from, and they don't know how to continue past the point where the prodigy takes them. There probably are prodigious capabilities, but there's also this nurturing of skill. Hence the name of Colvin's book, the title of Colvin's book. Talent is overrated. I would tend to agree, personally, with Anarchy, that it's practice. In Colvin's book, he says there's a linear relationship between the amount of practice that a person puts in and their expertise in a given area that they're practicing.
Plus, we don't know whether there's a limit somewhere up there.
We don't. And one other point that was being made here is that your knowledge is still with you. One of the things that Neil Maxwell said was that's one of the few things that is portable into the next life is the knowledge that we possess, because we don't have the physical abilities when we go.
Another idea here I think is really important is the idea to make this understanding of skill explicit to people. I think there's a lot of people that understand implicitly that they have prodigious skills. I mean, the piano prodigy that's sitting down playing Rachmaninoff, at 11, probably gets that they're a little different, that they have advanced skill, but if they don't understand these principles here about skill trajectory and the plateauing and how to get past it, then they'll never know. So just like with any other thing, there's principles that guide this behavior. And if we understand principles, we can improve or change the behavior.
Brad, did you have something?
I think that's so true in the church specifically because I can't, like President Watson has those wonderful spiritual experiences. I can't have them like he does. But I think what Gelber Scott says, I can. He's teaching us the process of gaining those skills. And so specifically in seminary, they've asked us, okay, you're great teaching the Book of Mormon, but teach students how to find these principles, how to do that for themselves.
And wherein does the skill lie? I think Carla had a key. It's not just that he gets zinged. Well, we don't know this, do we? But what we think he's telling it to us as if it were all of us could have this capability. And it's as if he were trying to describe the skill. What does the skill consist in? It consists, I think, Carla, you were talking about a readiness and a kind of focus. When Nephi says, I think it's Nephi, he says, let your heart be drawn out, long drawn out continually. Somebody give me, come on, one of you guys that knows let your heart be long drawn out continually in prayer. What's the exact wording there? And where is it? Was it Nephi?
Yeah, it's 2 Nephi chapter 4. I think it's the Psalm of Nephi.
Thank you. What verse?
But he talks about his heart is drawn out in prayer to God by day and his tears water his pillow by night for his presence.
And he talks about pondering and keeping yourself ready all the time. Let virtue garnish. Now here's a verse that a lot of people puzzle and maybe misconstrue. Let virtue garnish thy thoughts unceasingly. Depending on what you say virtue is, what is virtue? It's not just immoral thoughts. It's not just worldly thoughts. What is virtue? Anarchy and then Keith.
I think it's constructive things. I keep thinking of this as a cognitive apprenticeship, but maybe a spiritual apprenticeship. I think being immersed in the atmosphere of things and being there all day, that's how we learn a real life skill. If you're going to be an apprentice to a master swordsmith, you go and you live in his workshop and you watch him make things, and you're immersed in this all day. In spiritual ways, if we were going to have an apprenticeship, we needed to have that environment with us all the time and have it garnishing our thoughts by having it surrounding us all day. And so I think it has to be, not necessarily, virtue as just good and pretty, but as in constructive and related and relevant.
Good. Keith?
I was just going to reference back to Bishop H. David Burton's talk on the 80 virtues, I think in the April 2009 General Conference. He lists about 5 or 6, like charity, humility,
As a matter of fact, let's go to that list, because virtue is used in that list. Let's look at D&C, section 4, verse 6. It's a list of things. Can somebody remember it? Faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, brotherly kindness, charity, godliness, charity, humility. You're reading it. Diligence.
Yeah,
You want the truth, right?
Yes, we do want it, and we want it straight. We don't want to corrupt the scriptures. Okay. Now, is that just a list? Is that just an unordered list? Or is it possibly a progression? Faith leads to virtue. And that doesn't just mean that I'm faith. How are we told that we learn in section 88? How do we learn? Yes, we learn by faith. Faith, virtue, knowledge. Is it possible to look at that and say, oh, this, I don't know, I could be starting a heresy here. Is it possible to construe this idea of virtue as the ability to do something, the ability to perform, the ability to do? Steve?
That's a good way to look at it. I mean, really, virtue is capacity, ability to do something, right? Like this, the virtues.
Faith, capacity, knowledge. Then once you have the knowledge, you're responsible for that, and you're expected to have temperance. That means temperance. What's that? Knowing when to use it and when not to do something. Knowing how to use the knowledge that you have to govern your behaviors. And there was a great talk in temperance on this last conference too. Faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance. Then you say, I'm getting to be a pretty good person, and other people around me are not being very nice people, and so I'm just going to have to be patient. Faith, virtue, knowledge, temperance, patience, brotherly kindness. This patience leads to brotherly kindness. And then, as you learn that as a part of your normal being, you're part of godliness. Godliness. Now, here's the interesting thing that happens. Charity, if you'll study a little bit about charity, you'll discover that it is a gift. It's something that you have, but it's also something that you're given. So it's kind of a two-way street. But there is a time when you can receive charity as a gift. And it's not taken away after that. And then you need humility and diligence, which means the same as endurance. At least it could be construed that way. Steve?
Yeah, probably one of the best verses about receiving charity, like you said, is when Moroni is recounting in Mormon in chapter 7, verse 48. That's a really, it's off the quote, it's really powerful. But you began with faith and you didn't say anything about that. That's the only one you didn't describe. Why is that?
Why is faith?
Why didn't you describe faith when you were defining these and showing how they fit in some order?
Because I was trying to get to virtue.
Faith is possibly one of the most important ones. Yeah, I was wondering what you do with that.
Is having faith a skill? Is acting in faith a skill? Are there, as a matter of fact, described in here the skills of a saint? The skills needed to become a saint? A better saint? An acceptable saint whose gift is accepted?
All of this, like I was speaking as we were talking about skill, like why are skills needed? If we're leaving this life, and we talked about how it's like imprinted in your memory. Well, what I think is kind of important about skills is the process that is needed. And as you brought this up, this is all a process. And, the process remains. People have to learn how to become. And what are they learning to become? It's learning how to progress, to be like God.
The foundations of the ability change over time and combine and recombine with each other as the performer gains insights, losing the identity of the original ability through blending. So slowly we become, as Brigham Young would say, pickles. He says if you sit in the brine long enough, you'll become a pickle. But it takes a while for you to become a pickle. You have to absorb it. I thank you very much for your willingness to engage in a discussion today. I hope it's been useful for you. It's been very helpful for me. I don't know if this is the first seminar where somebody's borne their testimony, but I want to bear in mind that these principles that I've taught today may or may not be true. But the gospel is true. And it's interesting when we see parallels in one part of our knowledge, our spiritual knowledge, that help us to understand secular knowledge, and things in our secular knowledge that help us to understand and interpret spiritual knowledge. Now let me give you a caution. This is Henry Eyring cautions against this. Don't try to make those two come together. Keep them separate and let them continue to complement each other and open up new vistas of understanding for you. Don't try to write papers that convert people to be Mormons, even covertly. And don't try to make Mormonism into secularism. But just enjoy in the wonderful insights that we have in this period, this dispensation where knowledge is being poured out without measure. And this is just, thank you for this opportunity today. I bear my testimony of Christ as a Savior and of Joseph Smith as a prophet. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. Thank you.